Hi, and welcome everyone to day 2 of Children's Advocacy Week. I hope you've enjoyed today's virtual rally, and we miss seeing you all in person at the Capitol. While we're waiting for everyone to join, please use the chat feature to say hello. Again, just thank you to all of you for joining us today for our first of many policy discussions that we're having this week. And for those of you who do not know me, I am Mahak Kalra with Kentucky Youth Advocates. I'm the Chief Policy Officer here. And as I said, today is the first of many policy conversations. We have 2 longstanding champions for kids joining us today. Chair of the Senate Education Committee, Senator Max Wise of Campbellsville, and Senate Minority Caucus Chair and Education Committee member, Senator Reggie Thomas from Lexington. So the goal of today's conversation is all about learning about education and early childhood policy priorities and hearing from these 2 legislators about the 2020 General Assembly and why we need to hear from you as advocates for kids and families. So we ask you to stay muted, but we're taking questions and comments via the chat feature, and we'll try to answer those along as we go along. And so today, the flow of the conversation is we're going to have Senator Reggie Thomas join us for the first 20 minutes or so, and then we'll have a short break, which will be featuring some cute kids from Kentucky and their art, and then have Senator Wise join us. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ben Gies to get it started.
Well, thank you so much, Mahak. I always appreciate your warm and friendly introductions. And today I have the honor and privilege of introducing Chair Thomas of the Kentucky State Senate. We are so fortunate to have you, Senator Thomas, this afternoon. And I'm sure that so many of our friends and colleagues out in what I call Zoom land are eager to hear firsthand what's happening throughout the remainder of this 2021 Kentucky General Assembly. But before we get to those meat and potatoes, I think it's always important to get to know our leaders at a more human level. We all have a story, and we know that that personal lens oftentimes sends us on some direction as to how we view the world, how we view our role in the world, and what we leave behind to the world at the end of the day. And so Senator Thomas, with an undergraduate degree from Dartmouth and a law degree from the August Institute, the Harvard University School of Law, and a seat on the Kentucky State Senate Education Committee, you clearly are an individual who values education, and we're very glad to see that. So Senator Thomas, if you could share with us a little bit about your personal background and what propelled you to be such a strong voice in the world of education. In short, how has the lens in which you view the world shaped your education advocacy? Senator Thomas?
Well, Ben, first of all, I want to thank you and Ms. Mahak Kalra for having me today. And of course, the Executive Director of Kentucky Youth Advocates, Dr. Terry Brooks. I think the Kentucky Youth Advocates does stellar work in supporting youth issues and issues of young people here in the state. And I think Dr. Brooks, in my personal view, is one of those salt of the earth type of gentlemen. He's very special.
Absolutely.
To answer your question, I grew up in a family that just valued education. I mean, like a lot of children, you get your values, you learn your morals and your priorities from your parents. And my parents always valued education. Both of them were college graduates themselves. They finished Kentucky State University in the 50s. And so as long as I can remember being as a child, I knew I was going to college. It was just expected of me and my sister that we were going to go to college. And when we brought our report cards home, every quarter or so, if the grades were not good, we heard about that from our parents. They emphasized the importance of having good grades. And so, going to college was just something expected of me. I was very fortunate in this respect, Ben. I will say that there are different styles of learning. I think there's 7 styles of learning that we learn as we become more educated and more worldly. College really emphasized. K through 12 education when I was coming up in the 60s really emphasized rote memorization. That was the learning model that was primarily used at that point in time. I've always had a good memory. So the way students were expected to learn, or learning style for K through 12 education, really fit me and my style of learning. I don't think there's something that was good for other students, because we all learn differently. We're all capable of learning and learning well. We just learn differently. But my point I want to make with regard to your question is that the learning style used back in the 60s, in elementary school, public schools, really fit my style of learning. So I benefited from that. And obviously I did well. I was an honor student in high school and got opportunities to go to Dartmouth College and Harvard Law School, and fortunately took advantage of those opportunities.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing that background. I guess my question for you, Senator Thomas, is if we have some youth who are listening today, or their parents or advocates or community mentors, what's your message for that youth who may be growing up in urban Louisville or Lexington or Northern Kentucky, who may not come from a very well-educated family or background? Maybe they're a little bit lower on the socioeconomic scale, but they've got that fire in their belly and they've got a good brain in their head. Or similarly, that student who may be growing up on a tobacco farm out in Cadiz, Kentucky, with big dreams and big hopes and big plans. What's your nugget of advice for those students who are really willing to commit themselves to the power of education?
I guess, Ben, my point would be to all those students: pursue your dreams. Don't let any people tell you can't do it. Tune out the naysayers. Tune out the noise, and just work hard and realize that you can achieve anything you want to achieve if you believe in yourself and willing to work hard and make the sacrifices. You don't have to come from families with a lot of financial assets. My father, for instance, was a single, was born out of wedlock, and in rural Western Kentucky, and yet he worked hard in school and got himself to Kentucky State University, and got his degree and had a good life, with my mother and raising two children. He was a school teacher, and later on became the first Black textbook salesman in the city of Chicago, selling textbooks. So it's all a matter of what's inside of you. Ben, that's my message to your young viewers today. If you have the right stuff inside of you and willing to pay the price, you can achieve anything you want to achieve. You can be anything you want to be.
Absolutely. And for those youth out there, definitely pay attention, because I agree wholeheartedly. And I'm very grateful to Senator Thomas for that point of view. I guess my next question for you, Senator, is in addition to your seat on the Senate Education Committee, you also have a seat on the Economic Development and Labor Committee. So tell us, how do you see the worlds of education and economic development linked? And how can private industry and public education work together more efficiently and productively?
Well, they are linked, because you can't have successful economic development, successful manufacturing processes, or technological advancements, or skilled training with regard to internet, without having education, without having an understanding of how the various pieces fit together to make the systems work, the processes work. That all comes with education, and so they do go hand in hand. Job seekers, job providers, employers want well-educated people who can come in, use their systems, understand their processes, and help to make their enterprise better and more successful. And of course, in doing so, the employees, the workers, enrich themselves as well. And educated people can be managers, they can be supervisors, they can be entrepreneurs, and go out and create their own businesses, their own enterprises and be successful. But all that comes with education. You can't have economic development and the growth and the innovation that comes with that without being educated in your own right.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I know that a big push right now in the schools here in Louisville, and I know in several other public districts throughout the state, is to emphasize more of what I call the skilled trades. So how can you learn a trade and how can you do your best in that trade to ultimately progress maybe through a community college or a trade school, learn a valuable skill, enter the workforce, and really contribute to the economic infrastructure of not only Kentucky, but the United States as a whole. So what's your view of the college route versus the trade school route versus the military versus those skilled trades? Is there a place for all of these different vocations in Kentucky? And if not, how do we make Kentucky an attractive place for those industries to bring those jobs, to give these students who have these skilled trades those opportunities?
Ben, I'm really glad you asked that question. I do a lot of interviews, and I was on the radio yesterday in Lexington, and I was asked a similar question. And I said yesterday, and I'm saying again today, that I think the biggest growth I've made as a legislature from 2014 to today, and the biggest change in my thought process is that I've now come to the realization, Ben, that you don't have to get your college degree to be successful. I used to think that I want everybody to go to college and get a college degree. But I've changed my mind on that. I think you can be quite successful and quite productive. Just getting a skill, a trade, a credential, some certification that you've mastered a particular field, and you can take that and do very well, whatever that is. Automotive manufacturing, some sort of medical technology. You name it. You can and be quite successful. So a college degree isn't necessarily the ticket to success. There are other avenues of educational advancement that one can achieve short of college, and I think we need to pursue that. One thing I think we need to look at being going forward in education is apprenticeships. Apprenticeships for professional jobs, apprenticeships for trade and skilled jobs. We really need to do more in the area of apprenticeships. I'm a big promoter of that. I'm a strong supporter of our community college system. BCTC, the community college in Lexington, is in my Senate district. I like to always say, Ben, let me say this now, since we're talking about education. All your major educational institutions in Fayette County are in my Senate district. Mm-hmm. The central office for the Fayette County Public Schools is in my Senate district. BCTC, the community college, is in my Senate district. Transylvania University, the private college there in Lexington, is in my Senate district. And UK, our flagship state higher education institution, is in my Senate district. So you can see why education is very important to me and important to my constituents.
Absolutely, and we're thrilled that you have that level of influence and that level of care with so many incredible educational institutions in your area in Fayette County, Kentucky. Moving on to more of the policy lens here. So we've talked sort of our big ideas. What do we want our future state of Kentucky to be? And what I hear you say, Senator Thomas, is you want it to be a place where kids can dream big, whether they come from a wealthy, affluent household or from one that's less affluent, regardless of where in the state you're from, that if you've got a fire in your belly and you've got a brain in your head, that you can make it in Kentucky. And we want that to be multidimensional. We want that to be whether your dream is to go to Harvard Law, such as yourself, or your dream is to get an associate's degree, or your dream is to become a skilled tradesman in plumbing, electrical work, or carpentry. I know I was a first generation college student, and my father was a carpenter here in the south end of Louisville. And he was quite successful, and I was quite successful too. So as I like to say, it's different strokes for different folks. But here's a question about infrastructure. We hear a lot about economic infrastructure and, quite frankly, sometimes the lack thereof here in the Commonwealth. For example, our annual Kids Count release found that Kentucky ranks 40th out of 50 states, that's pretty bad, 40th in broadband internet access. And what that translates into is 30% of students, and most profoundly, 35% being students of color, lack adequate technology at home. So tell us more about efforts in the state budget to increase access to broadband internet in Kentucky's rural and urban communities for Kentucky's kids. Because, Senator, when we think about broadband internet access, clearly, I've got a good internet connection, you do too. That makes it possible for us to have this Zoom forum today. We know that it's important in the world of education, not to mention in telehealth, during the pandemic days that we find ourselves in. But if we think about access to good, equitable educational opportunities, we know the internet was important before the pandemic. It's taken on a new kind of importance right now during the pandemic. And we certainly know that that access to internet is only going to grow in importance, especially when we think about educational equity years and years and years, even after the pandemic has ceased to exist. So my question is, how do we get more students connected to the internet, whether you're in Paducah, whether you're in Pikeville, whether you're in Louisville, or whether you're in Lexington?
Ben, this gives me a chance to talk about our budget process and to applaud our governor on his leadership. Because as you know, and I want to tell all your viewers, we're going to adopt another budget this year. Because of the COVID pandemic, we only passed a one-year budget last year. Okay, so we got to pass another one-year budget this year. Usually we pass a two-year budget, but we didn't do so because of the COVID pandemic. So we got to pass a budget. And our governor, who I think has done a great job in saving lives here in Kentucky because of the decisions he's made in navigating this pandemic, has put in a proposed $50 million of money to finish broadband throughout Kentucky. You know, Kentucky we have what we call a Kentucky wired network that's been built now for 6 years, almost done, but we haven't reached everybody in Kentucky. Well, our governor wants to change that, and he wants to finish the job. And in doing so, he's allocating $50 million. So it doesn't matter whether you live in the Hollows of Letcher County or the river counties over in Hickman or Ballard, that you can have access to internet and be able to reach the entire world. We're at a point now, we're at a stage now, being where if you don't have internet in your home, then you become irrelevant. You know, you are a lost person in this country. Okay, and we can't have that in Kentucky. We cannot have that. So we're going to make sure from this budget, I want to make sure it stays in, that we're going to pump in $50 million so that we can have the infrastructure, the economic and technological infrastructure throughout the state for every Kentuckian to have broadband access. And this is so important, as you've indicated, for educational advancement, because with all these NTI days and learning that we've had to adjust to because of the COVID pandemic, we've got to be able to reach those students. Healthcare, some counties don't have the quality of healthcare that other counties have, but by being able to do telehealth, they have access to a doctor and get quality healthcare. Economic development, new ideas in the internet and in technology, can be born and birthed through broadband access. I mean, you name it, you can do it, if you have access to the internet. Okay, so that's what we're going to do, to move Kentucky forward as a state, making sure that every resident in Kentucky has access to broadband.
Absolutely, I totally agree. I know a bit about my family background. I was born and raised here in Louisville, Kentucky. But my entire family is from the Mammoth Cave area, Edmonson County, Kentucky. Back in November, I recently lost my grandfather, which was a big blow to me personally.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, thank you. But he was really my idol. And I remember hearing stories from him growing up in rural Edmonson County in the Depression era, and really living there all the way up to the 1950s before he hopped in the car and came to the south end of Louisville, which is where my family lives today. And back in those days, in those rural environs of Kentucky, it wasn't until the late 50s, sometimes even the 60s, sometimes even the 70s, before folks had equal access to electricity. So imagine that. And I feel like history in this sense kind of repeated itself when it comes to internet access. And so like electricity and the TVA, how all of that was the infrastructure issue of the 30s all the way up until the 60s in Kentucky and in other parts of the South and in other parts of America. You know, what we're doing today, our grandchildren will talk about how this generation made equitable internet access the issue of the day, put forth that good hard scrabble Kentucky spirit, paired it with the American spirit, and got it done. And I don't know about you, but I'd like my grandkids to say that about me. Do you agree?
Absolutely, I agree. The model here, to finish your point, is what President Roosevelt did in the 30s during the Great Depression, when he created the Rural Electrification Act to provide electricity to the rural parts of all America, Montana, Wyoming, make sure that those rural areas had electricity in the same quality as people living in the cities.
Yeah.
I see Senator Wise is coming on, and I'm going to have to get off here shortly because I've got a 12:30 Zoom meeting as well. But so if you have one other question, I'll be glad to entertain.
Absolutely, and thank you so much. I'll make it a twofer if that's okay with you.
Okay.
First closing question, keeping on that topic of infrastructure, early childhood and access to childcare in particular. We know that here in Kentucky, 50%, half of all Kentuckians live in what's called a childcare desert, no access to childcare. And when you think about how that keeps adult working parents out of the workforce, but also keeps their children under the age of 5, non-school age children, away from those early learning and socialization opportunities, you know, talk about an equity issue, that's a huge one. So my question for you is, how do we work within the state budget through CCAP, maybe through federal money to grow childcare access throughout Kentucky? And then the closing final question is, what can folks on here do today to take action on some of the things we've talked about? And how can they get in contact to you in your office if they have questions?
Okay. Well, you allow me to close on my favorite subject. So I'm
great.
I appreciate that question. What we need here being in Kentucky to really get to the next level is to have early childhood education. That we start school at 4-year-olds for students, so they can get into this to learning earlier and reading and socialization skills and doing simple math. We need to have early childhood education. A lot of states have that. Okay? We don't have that yet in Kentucky. In fact, we don't even have full-day kindergarten yet. But we need to start with early child. We need to have early child education because the achievement gaps being that we talk about here in Kentucky really begin in kindergarten. You've got achievement gaps in kindergarten, and those gaps just exacerbate over time, you know, because of the different economic circumstances that children come from. We can close that achievement gap significantly, as well as expand educational opportunities for our children if we get them to school early. So to answer your question, in my opinion, we talk about child care, we need to have early child education. So we get 4-year-olds in school and get the learning process started then. That is the best thing we can do for Kentuckians going forward.
Wonderful. And I guess in closing, if we've got people online who are wanting to get a hold of you in your office, what's the best way for them to do that?
I would really like everyone listening today to email me at reginald.thomas@lrc.ky.gov. And they can stay in contact with me. I'll capture their emails. I'll send them my newsletters, and I'll respond to their emails. I respond to every email, believe it or not. So let me repeat that one more time. reginald.thomas@lrc.ky.gov.
And thank you. If one of our Zoom helpers could maybe pull that off the LRC website and drop it into the chat, I'm sure that would help our folks out in Zoom land as well. And so, Senator Thomas, I know that you're very busy. You've got 5 minutes to go before your next meeting, so I won't keep you. But again, I just want to offer you our most profound thanks for carving some time out of your incredibly busy schedule to talk about the youth of Kentucky and talk about how we can make Kentucky the best place in the whole country to be young. We very much appreciate it.
That's the goal and the objective. And again, please pass my highest regards on to Dr. Terry Brooks.
I will certainly do that. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Well, wonderful. If you are out in Zoom land and you want to do some virtual applause in the chat feature for Senator Thomas, we certainly welcome it. I think he deserves it. He's been honest. He's given us his opinion, and I think that most of us would tend to agree with what he's had to say today. So show him some love if you haven't already. I think now we are going to transition to some cute kids as we prepare to welcome Chairman Max Wise of the Senate Education Committee.
I think we could just go ahead and get started since Senator Wise is here.
Even better. Is Chairman Wise on the line with us then?
I'm here.
Excellent. Excellent. And welcome, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate you taking the time today to join us. I know we've had the opportunity to meet a time or two, and I look forward to getting to know you a bit better today.
Ben, thank you for the invitation, and thank you to Kentucky Youth Advocates. I know it's different this session than any other, and I think that's the way the world has become since everything. But thanks for the opportunity to be here today, answer some questions. And Mahak, thank you always for your help and your assistance.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I know we just had the opportunity, and I think you caught maybe the tail end of our discussions with your friend and colleague and fellow Senate Education Committee member, Senator Thomas of Fayette. Senator Thomas shared his reflections with us on a number of key issues impacting the work of the state Senate and the Commonwealth more generally. We're excited, of course, to learn more about your role as the Senate Education Committee Chairman and your priorities in this 2021 Kentucky legislative session. So I'm sure that many tuning in from afar today are wondering what the remainder of this all-important General Assembly session will hold for them. Can you kind of give us an overview of the items high on your priority list as Senate Ed Chairman? And what, in your view, are some of the biggest obstacles to students learning that must be addressed by your friends and colleagues, both in the Senate chamber and across the rotunda in the House chamber? What are your big kahuna items you're wanting to tackle with these last month of session?
Well, you know, the interim for the Education Committee, the entire interim was spent dealing with COVID-19, and every meeting that we had was looking at when the pandemic hit towards the end of school, the shift we had to make with the end of the school year. We've discussed so many topics with education. I mean, we've looked at the good things that we've learned from COVID. We've also seen the inequalities that have been brought out because of COVID. We've also discussed testing. We've also discussed every method of learning. I'm not only the chairman of education, but I'm also the father of 4 students that are elementary, middle school, and high school. So I've seen as a parent everything that this has brought from the different learning models that we're trying to all be adjusting to. I appreciate the job of our teachers. I appreciate the job of our school administrators. And most importantly, also to the families that have had to do this. It's been a child care issue. It's been a workforce issue. It's been a broadband issue. It's been everything that we can imagine. I think that we're looking like we're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. We know we're not there completely yet, but we're hoping with education that we're going to continue to see those wheels turning to get students back in an in-person and safe environment for them and for our teachers as we go forward. You know, the big thing of the last days of the session is going to be the budget. That was probably the biggest things before the session started. When you've got a 30-day session, unprecedented to do a one-year budget, I think our leadership of the House and Senate did a fantastic job last year of not trying to throw together a 2-year budget, but to split that in half. I think that was a very smart decision on their part. But I think right now we have to look at the budget and the revenue that we have. I think a lot of this money we have, it's artificially inflated dollars. It's federal dollars that are not going to be here for the long term. So we've got to be very smart with our finances. We've got to make sure that what we're receiving, that we could put some of that back into a rainy day fund, because I don't think the worst of our budget problems are this session as they're going to be in the next 2 years. So we've got to be very careful with how we spend that money. I know you've talked about some issues such as early childhood. I think broadband is something we really need to have the conversation about, because once again, COVID has showed some of the inequalities in education, And as a rural legislator, and I think also for those, even my colleagues in the urban districts, they would say that broadband access to families has been a major challenge for us.
Absolutely, and I think that you hit the nail on the head on some of the major items that we discussed with Senator Thomas, but also that we've been hearing about even before the pandemic, certainly during the pandemic, and we'll be hearing about again once this pandemic has faded into memory. We look forward when that day happens, but I know one of the issues that we have focused on a lot here at KYA is really how this pandemic has brought about large challenges, as you said, in the world of education and every other sector for that matter. But we know that many would say that while the pandemic itself has been unprecedented, at least in our lifetimes, the pandemic has merely laid bare so many of the inequities that have plagued education in our Commonwealth for a very long time. When we look at an issue like broadband access, for example, we know that inequitable internet access has kept students offline during pandemic learning, but we also know that their lack of internet access must surely have impacted their educational opportunities before the pandemic and will do so afterwards. So when we talk about closing gaps in those access, or if we talk about one of the issues that you're a true champion in, that's the area of school safety. How can we continue to close those gaps and invest in education so that way we cover up not only the gaps exposed by the pandemic, but we ensure that we capitalize on this as a crisis, but also an opportunity in moving our state forward? What's your suggestion in that regard?
Well, you hit it perfectly. I think a lot of times when we think about the pandemic, we just continue to focus on the clouds and the dark clouds of what it's brought as inequalities, but there are opportunities. I think education will be forever changed. I think that's K through 12, and I think that's also post-secondary. I think that we are going to see many opportunities that hybrid learning has brought. I think that there is a platform for virtual learning of developing some type of learning academies from K through 12. I also don't think that's going to be the only model. I do think that, and I think it's experts will tell you, and I think parents and students and teachers, that in-person education is still valuable, but I do think that that model is some students have thrived with some of the learning models that have been offered virtually. So I think we've got to be very creative. I think we have to come up with some innovative ways going forward. I think that needs to be local decision making, though, on that. I don't think that actually Frankfurt needs to create the virtual academy model. I think schools of innovation, districts could get very innovative going forward with this. But I think that, that there will be some opportunities. When you mentioned the school safety, I think the mental health component is so important in this. When we start transitioning, getting students back, and let's say that it is within the next month or two, or maybe it's not for some districts. Maybe they want us to continue a hybrid model for the rest of the school year. But we have to make sure that that mental health component of the access to telehealth, the access to guidance counselors, social workers, school psychologists, all of those that we've mentioned as the makes the mental health component, we have to make sure that we have those accessible to our students. None of us fathom what the pandemic's done, to so many children across the Commonwealth and even across the world for that matter. We know that not every child comes from the same background and the same home life situation. And we know that our educators have done a phenomenal job of trying to reach out to those students. There's been students that have been lost in this. And so we have to make sure that we still re-engage those students, and we have to get them back into that safe environment. And funding wise, what the pandemic did last year, I know we were wanting to do more with the Mental Health and the School Safety Resiliency Act. And I do think that the Senate and the House, the A&R committees are going to revisit that. I'm going to make a push for that. I'm not on those committees, but it doesn't mean that I don't have a voice when it gets into budget funding. But, I will make sure that I'm very, very outspoken to make sure that school safety is still a priority.
Absolutely. And of course, as you already know, we're incredibly grateful for your voice and your leadership on that. I know that the hundreds of people who are listening to this today also feel the same way. And so we're very appreciative of that.
Thank you.
I want to dig a little bit deeper into the area of mental health, student mental health in particular, which I know that you've been a champion for and you've discussed quite eloquently on our call today. I know at KYA, when we think about the School Safety and Resiliency Act, or the Senate Bill 1 of 2019, we heard the phrase the hardware and the heartware. And that really refers to some of the physical improvements of school buildings. But as you said earlier, the investment in mental health, or the hardware that it takes to really knock down barriers from teacher to student and human to human, to make sure that all students feel that their school is a safe and caring place for them to come, to nurture their personal development as a human person, but also the academic development of their mind and their heart. So tell us a bit more about the hardware and the hardware. You mentioned the big allocations coming out in this state budget. Do you see this as a good time, even though kids are not in their physical building all throughout the Commonwealth? I know we're working towards that. Do you see it as a good time to sneak in while kids are away, do physical improvements to schools, but then also taking into account all of the trauma that many have experienced in a year that's witnessed everything to a pandemic, to civil unrest, to social unrest, to a myriad number of other issues? How can we be cognizant of those things during this time and transform this crisis into opportunity?
Well, I do think it has been an opportunity. I mean, the reason being is with children not being in school, we just, once again, we just don't know the impact this has happened because there's no been supervision. When the children are in the school systems, teachers see if there's signs of abuse, and they have access right then to talk to social workers and talk to counselors. So I do think when we bring those children back, that's going to be so important, is to be able to have that access to that care, especially on the mental health component of this. You talk about, like I said, the hardware portion of that. It's all about relationships. School and the relationships that students have with their teachers, the relationships that develop within the school walls. For the most part, when students are able to talk to teachers about their problems, or they see something with another student, that's how many times the cases involving school shootings or anything like that happens, many times it's being alert and being aware and talking. With schools not being in session, being in school, yeah, we've not seen a rise of school violence across the country. However, that doesn't mean, though, that we still can't take that serious. We just saw when Murray High School went right back here this past week or so, there was a threat that was made, and we made sure in that bill, any hoaxes, anything like that there would be dealt deliberately with. So, we have to be recognized, to all these different issues and things that are facing us in our Commonwealth. And so I do think that, in a budget such as this, if there is some federal dollars that could be put forward as it relates to, school safety, then we could try to include that into the budget. And you all know how the budget works. Everybody's got their calls. Everyone wants it to go to what they think is the most important. But I think what we were wanting to do last year, we were not able to do. But I would hope that our A&R committees can go back and revisit, what that additional funding, would actually look like.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For folks who take a keen interest in school safety and the budget provisions around it, what advice do you have to your everyday advocate listening today for ways that they can ensure that these all important allocations are made and finally signed into law in the state budget process?
Well, the best thing is to contact your legislators. I mean, they're your direct access. And so, I would just encourage everyone on the LRC website to look at who those members are of the House and Senate appropriation committees. But once again, even if your legislator is not a member of those committees, doesn't mean that they still cannot be a voice. It also is talking to your groups like KYA, who have, an access to the members at the table, and making sure that they're being proponents of whatever issue that it is that it may be. It's also talking to members of our leadership team and making sure that they're aware of funding needs that are out there. So always staying in touch with legislators is my best advice to anyone.
Absolutely. And I know, sort of pivoting in this arena, I know that when I first came to Kentucky Youth Advocates as a policy director almost 2 years ago now, I came from my role as a local Board of Education member and also a former K-12 public school educator, having taught American history and government in Oldham County schools. So when I first started at KYA and I was going through the state budget, my eyes always first went to SEEK, because that's what I was trained to do as a board member in particular. But I've spent some time here and I've talked to people all across our Commonwealth. And what has intrigued me more than anything else, and it surprised me in my own personal role here, is how much attention I have paid, rightly so, and the community as a large has paid to early childhood education. And in particular, taking a look at childcare and childcare access and the role that early learning plays for students who are not in the K through 12 system, but who are, say, age 5 and below. So my question is, we know that SEEK is important, and I'd like for you to comment on the role that SEEK plays in equitable public schooling across the Commonwealth, but also comment on the role of early education and how we can loop childcare, which is in its own separate bucket away from the K-12 system, into ensuring that from essentially the earliest years of a child's life to kindergarten, through senior year, through community college, through post-secondary educational opportunities, how do we strengthen this system to work more collaboratively together to ensure that there's a warm handoff from early childhood to K-12 to post-secondary, and ensure that all of the children across Kentucky nurture their loves and their interests throughout that long arc of their academic career?
In terms of SEEK formula, I don't think we're going to see that. We don't have the bandwidth this session to go in and change any models of SEEK formula. But SEEK actually has been a model for other states to look at Kentucky on how we do funding. But that doesn't mean that in the interim that we can't maybe take a look at the appropriations of funds that are going out there towards SEEK. But what the pandemic brought this past year, there was just no bandwidth with us in the interim to really focus on changing a SEEK model or a SEEK formula. I know there's some districts that would love for us to do that. But I think for right now, SEEK will stay where it currently is, and how that model is allocated towards the districts. In terms of early childhood, we've looked at that. We've looked at full day kindergarten. There is so many things right now that in terms of the budget and the policymakers, have to look at. I mean, the governor and lieutenant governor put together a continuum education group that I'm a part of right now. It's about 80 some members that are looking at everything from early childhood all the way. It's kind of that P through 20 of that model, and I think that needs to be what we need to start looking at is capturing kids at that early age in terms of do they have the access in terms of reading skills and math skills. And so one of the things we're going to look at this session is third grade reading level, but we really shouldn't wait until third grade. We got to make sure that student is brought up early on and that has the skills necessary for them to be equipped once they get to third grade. So I think once again, a lot of this all comes down to funding. It just depends on, in terms of the legislature, what are they wishing to allocate? What are going to be the priorities? And so I know that right now those discussions are ongoing, and I look forward to seeing, where we're going to be in terms of education.
Absolutely. And I know that I gave you the hard questions first, I think, the more meat and potatoes issues. So we'll move on to a bit lighter conversation and just ask you more about your personal worldview. Obviously, you're the chair of the Senate Education Committee. It's a big deal. What really inspired you to seek that role? And what in your own biography or your personal background motivated you to seek public office, to make education one of your top issues? I know that you've spent some time in the collegiate world as an educator, but I wonder if maybe it even goes a little bit further back with that. What to you makes education such a top issue?
Well, I've always approached, my life of thinking the only way we get to where we are in the world today is we've had good teachers in our lives. You don't have good doctors unless you've had good teachers. You don't have good social workers unless you've had good teachers and good mentors. And I've been very fortunate that I've taught in the undergraduate classroom before. I'll also now teach at the graduate level at the University of Kentucky. And so I just felt like with my background, once I came into the legislature, of being in that college classroom, many other legislators are not educators. And so I just felt like that was a role that when leadership had an opening for a chairman position, I came in as vice chairman. It was just a good natural fit for me. But I've also approached the world that we do, and the way that I approach my job as a chairman is looking at education as being a bipartisan and also nonpartisan, because we're dealing with kids and trying to make the best decision of what's best for that child. And so I've tried to model myself on that. Many times it can be very difficult, to take the approaches that we do, because sometimes we get so focused on the wedge issues, we don't think about the other bills that we've passed, which have been very good bipartisan bills. And I've tried to kind of do that within the world of education, especially when we look at school safety and some of the other stuff that we've done. I felt you got to have good listening skills. We learned that in schools. How many times teachers tell us elementary, middle school, high school, put your listening ears on. You need to do the same as a legislator. You need to listen. We may not always agree, but you need to be willing to bring all the people to the table and be willing to share ideas and listen to each other. And then I take it back to being a father. You know, I've got 4 kids of my own, and I try my best in terms of the world that they're a part of right now, pandemic or non-pandemic, of how much the importance of education is to them, how much is important for them to be involved in school. And you know, I just think that education is just, it's invaluable. We need to be lifelong learners. And so that's how I've tried to approach my job that I do. I'm not going to do this forever. I'm not going to be the Student Education Committee Chairman forever. I enjoy what I do, but I've really enjoyed getting to develop the relationships here with my position.
Absolutely. And I think that's evident to all who have seen you in action over the last several years throughout the arc of your career here in Kentucky. And again, I can't stress how grateful we are for your leadership and your legislative acumen. We are truly lucky as a state to have you in the role that you're in. I guess one of my other questions, and I think that you do a great job of this, of course, you know, we as KYA as an organization, this is one of our core tenets, is looking at the lives of children holistically. A phrase that I've heard repeated from education leaders all over the Commonwealth throughout this crisis is a comparison between Maslow and Bloom, right? That first we've got to have one before we can have the other, meaning that we've got to have those basic needs met before we can really get to those cognitive brain power needs that people like me, who were 8th grade history teachers, really tried to drive home to my students. So when you think holistically about the lives of children, whether that be healthcare, whether that be child welfare, whether that be juvenile justice, whether that be home life, what are the core factors that you think make that infrastructure in a state that ultimately allows people to stand on their own 2 feet and then to start climbing that ladder of education on up to self-fulfillment and really leaving behind a legacy? How does someone have the type of home life that's needed to make a future chairman of the, or chairwoman of the Senate Education Committee? How do we do that?
Man, I wish I could answer that question with an absolute certainty. I mean, that's a big policy issue and just a big worldly issue that you're looking at. I think if I could answer that correctly, this world would be such a much better place. We all do not come from the same backgrounds. I was very blessed to have 2 really good parents. My mother was a college basketball coach, taught me about discipline, teamwork, and nothing's given to me. I've got a father who worked in a factory and Fruit of the Loom in Campbellsville, and he dealt with people and he did it the right way. Not everybody's got Max or parents like Max Wise. So I'm just very blessed with what I have. But also our communities many times can raise our children and the communities that we grow up in. And I think that's just making sure that as a Commonwealth, we're invested in our educational systems. We're invested in our childhoods, because we have seen true success stories of children that maybe not came out of the same household that I have, of 2 loving parents that had a lot of good opportunities. We have to make sure those opportunities are there for our children. And so, you know, if it's looking at first generational college students, I think there's nothing better success in life than seeing someone who didn't have the family structure that went to college and that student's successful and goes on to do that. But we've also got to dispel the myth that every student has to go to college. That's also not correct too. I think we've got to focus on career technical education. We got to focus on workforce. I think we need to capture that student at probably the middle school age of trying to get them on a track of what they want to do. You know, I've been very blessed this year to have worked on an international study group of looking at international education, of looking at other countries, of how they do this. And we know it's not going to be a change overnight, because a lot of it's culture. It's hard to change a culture when it gets into issues like education or family structure and things such as that. But, you know, I have learned that countries that have done this well are countries that are truly invested in the learning of the child and give them absolutely every opportunity that they can be successful in. And so, once again, I'm always just trying, you know, to study. I'm trying to learn in ways that I could be a better legislator, ways I could be a better policymaker.
Absolutely. And I'll check in quickly with my friend and colleague Mahak to just check on time. I have another question that I'd like to ask, but I want to be cognizant of our time and schedule today as well.
I think we could just ask one more question. I know the senator has a lot going on.
Absolutely. Well, one closing question for you. And just yesterday evening, I was watching KET, as I typically do on Monday nights, and the wonderful Renee Shaw was hosting a forum on workforce development here in Kentucky. And there were so many wonderful viewpoints, namely around the idea of childcare and childcare access and how that's a fundamental backbone of our economic infrastructure. And really, it's a workforce issue across the Commonwealth. But there were also discussions of international education, which piqued my curiosity when I heard you say that. We know that in some countries in the European Union, students there, they reach the 8th grade, they take a test, they're tracked, and sometimes that 8th grade test can determine whether you're the doctor, lawyer, or on down the ladder from there. Do you ascribe to that thinking, or do you think there's something flawed in that rationale? Can we really appraise human worth by the time a kid reaches the 8th grade?
You know, right now I'm studying Finland, and with the study group that I'm a part of. In Finland, it's 10th grade. 10th grade, you divert and you go to the academic upper echelon, or you go into more of a technical career readiness skills of what we've tried to do in Kentucky. You know, I think about the 10th grade portion. That's a very good one. I do think, though, in middle school, we can expose and we can kind of talk about, you know, in terms of different things. I mean, we got to think this next generation of students, you know, we've got to grasp artificial intelligence. We've got to change our vocational schools. You know, it's not so much now woodworking and making lamps and things such as that. I mean, many times we get fearful of robotics and we think all of a sudden robots are going to replace humans. We can't do that. We've got to now think in terms, how do we engage in this? How do we learn from it and help our workforce? And so these young kids coming up, they're phenomenal with computer skills, gaming, all the types of things that they're really good at. You know, and we've got to dispel some of the myths, once again, that I think that are out there. I'm not so much into taking tests and saying, this is what you're going to be. I've seen so many kids take an ACT test before, and the test comes back and it says, you know, you're a 20 ACT, you're a 19 ACT. Maybe this is what you need to do. I've seen kids in my college classes that have been high-level ACTs and low-level ACTs and had completely different trajectories once they got to college. You know, I think it all comes down to work ethic. I think it all comes down to those that are truly focused. And so I'm not so much into we test. I think the international community has shown us that. I think in the United States, we overtest. We try to teach to a test. I think we need to change. Test the better. Let teachers get back to the actual fundamentals of what education is. I go back to what the pandemic's given us. It's probably going to be some opportunities now to change the way that we address education. So we'll see what we can do. And I know the United States, many times in education, you know, we're not up there with Estonia. We're not up there with, you know, Japan and some of those other countries. And yeah, I think we need to, though, engage ourselves in career and technical education as much as possible. All once again for students going off to post-secondary and expanding their horizon. And we know college kids too. They come in with the major of their freshman year. They may change that 3 times in the course of the next 3 semesters. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, I've got a senior in high school. I told her don't do that 5 times of doing your college career, you know, but at the same time, you need to expose yourself. And so I don't want to say as 8th grade, this is what you're going to be. We're going to pigeonhole someone, you know, upon that.
Yeah, well, I think I can hear the choir singing hallelujah in the background and a few amens being shouted from the congregation to hear you say that. At least that's what I personally am doing internally right now. So I certainly agree with you on that issue. And, you know, I left Senator Thomas with this reflection is that when you think about the Commonwealth of Kentucky, you know, we're known throughout America and really throughout the world as having a real hard scrabble spirit. It may take us a long time to get it right, but we always get it right. And so if we can take that hard scrabble spirit of Kentucky and pair it with the American spirit of anything is possible and we can achieve anything, I think we're going to be living in the best state in America to be young. And I think that with you at the helm, we've got a good shot at it. So I just, again, want to thank you again for your time today. And if you have a closing refrain or some other information to share with our colleagues out in Zoom land, I'll let you do that before closing out today's program.
Well, I appreciate the kind words. And once again, I just want to thank everyone that's participating. And we've got a lot of sponsors that are on here. You know, thanks for your work and thanks for standing behind the Kentucky Youth Advocates. I do hate that Terry Brooks isn't on here with us. Please be sure to send my regards to Terry. I hope he's doing well. And, you know, as we go forward as a Commonwealth, you know, I just appreciate the support that we get as legislators of trying to do the best job for Kentucky families that are out there. But once again, thanks so much for the opportunity. Appreciate being with you all today.
Absolutely. The feeling is mutual. Have a good day,
Thank you all.
Senator Wise.
Thank you all.
Thank you. And we want to thank everyone else for joining us today. It's been a robust discussion. Certainly, if you have further questions, feel free to reach out to KYA, to Chairman Wise, and to Senator Thomas. But also remember the importance that you have as an individual advocate. Reach out to the 2 representatives you heard today, but reach out to your own representative and make sure that your voice is heard. Because we know that us as a Commonwealth, we're only as good as our citizenry and our residents, and you have the power to make that change. Mahak, any closing housekeeping items, or are we good to roll?
I think we're good. Thanks everyone for joining.
Alrighty, have a good day, and we'll see you soon.